Alright, so I'm going to be working the K Unit 2 test review for your test tomorrow. The first couple of questions, it says use your vocab list to write the correct word in each box. Do not use angles or vertical angles. Okay, so if we take a look at this first angle, it's a 45-degree angle. If I'm not going to describe it as an angle, I would probably call this an acute angle. Okay. Second one, obtuse, that's a 130-degree angle. That's greater than 90, less than 180. Okay. Here we've got our right angle equal to 90 degrees. Okay. This angle is a single straight line, so that's going to be called a straight angle equal to 180 degrees. Okay. Here we've got two separate angles. One is 50 and the other is 40. If you add 50 and 40 together, that's equal to 90. So these are complementary angles. Okay. Let's see. For this one, we could probably call this two things. We could call this a linear pair since it's two angles that are next to each other and they form a line. You could also call these adjacent angles. Okay? Linear pairs are always adjacent to each other. So anytime you describe something as a linear pair, you could also say that it's adjacent. Okay? These two angles are both 155 degrees. They don't add up to anything special like 90 or 180. So these are just congruent angles. Okay. In this picture, we have a ray that's dividing this angle into two equal parts, 50 and 50. So I believe that this picture is depicting a bisector. Okay, cutting this angle in half. You could also put congruent here, since bisectors divide an angle into two congruent parts. Okay. All right, this one, we've got a 26-degree angle and a 33-degree angle. They don't add up to anything special. 33 plus 26 is 59, so they're not complementary. They are right next to each other without overlapping each other, and that's our definition of adjacent. Okay. And last, we've got a 110-degree angle and a 70-degree angle. These add up to 180, so these are supplementary. Okay. Scooting down, we're going to use this image on the right to answer problems 1 through 3. So whenever we're working problems like this where we have a bunch of angles on a protractor, I highly suggest that you go through and write the measure of each section, each angle, before you start trying to answer these questions. Okay? So looking at the measure between M and R, I can see I've got 10, 20, 30. So this is a 30-degree angle. Okay. Going from R to K, this is in between the 30-degree and the 80-degree. Now, if you were using the bottom set of numbers, you can do that. Just be consistent. So if I wanted to use the bottom set, this would be, let's see, that's 150 and 100. So either way, when you look at what's in between, so we're subtracting here, okay, 80 minus 30 gives me 50. Or if I went the other way, 150 minus 100 still gives me 50. Okay. Now, I just wanted to show you that you can use either or. But for the rest of this problem, I'm going to be consistent and just use the top set of numbers. Okay? All right. In between K and E, we've got E is at 110, K is at 80, 110 minus 80 gives me 30. Also, just pointing out, you can count just like you could count on a ruler. This is 10, 20, and 30. Okay. So I'll do that for E to N. So we've got E here and N here, so I can count. This is 10, 20, and 30. Double checking, this is at 140 and that's at 110. 140 minus 110 is 30. All right, and then last, we're at 140 and 180. So I've got 10, 20, 30, 40. All right, so I've got all of my measurements laid out on this diagram. So now, if I need to go in and find different angle measurements, it's a lot easier than trying to count on this protractor from the beginning. All right, so it says name two angles that are complementary to each other. So, okay, one angle that I see right here, we've got a 50-degree angle and a 40-degree angle. If I add 50 plus 40, that's equal to 90. So I could say angle RVK and angle NVT are complementary since they add to 90. I should say add to 90. Okay, name two angles that are supplementary and non-adjacent. All right, so here's the deal. All of these angles are laid out on a straight angle that goes from M to V to T. So if I'm going to pick angles that add to 180 and are non-adjacent, I'm going to have to use angles that overlap each other in order for it to add up to 180 and not go past this line. All right, so let's try out some combinations here. Let's see, we already know we've got 50 and 40. Let's see, if I added this, that would be equal to 80. Let's see. We could get 110 here. And then, let's see. Or I could do Let me pause this video so I can think for a minute. Alright, so after taking some time to think, I found a pair of angles that overlap each other and also add up to 180. So the angles that I'm going to use are KVT. So 40 plus 30 plus 30 gives me that this angle is equal to 100. Okay? And then I know I need 80 to get to supplementary. So if I look at this angle here, RVE, 50 plus 30 gives me an 80-degree angle. So these two angles are overlapping each other, so they're non-adjacent, and 80 plus 100 gives me 180. So these are non-adjacent and supplementary. So we'll say RVE and KVT. Okay. All right. Number 3, name two angles that are adjacent. This one's a little bit easier. So we can just pick any two angles that are next to each other and not overlapping. So I'll say MVR, this angle here, and RVK, that angle there. There are a lot of adjacent angles in this picture, so if you didn't pick those two, it's fine. You could use these two angles, those two, any two that are next to each other and not overlapping. Okay, name an angle bisector in the diagram. So I can already see, since I labeled my angles, that this is 30 and this is 30. So that means that VE, this ray, is a bisector, since I've got two congruent angles on either side. Okay. What angle does it bisect? So we've got KVN that's being cut in half. So this is a 60-degree angle that's divided into 30 and 30. Let me put my angle symbols on these other answers. Okay. All right. I'm going to speed up here a little bit. What is always true, keyword there, about vertical angles? Okay. Vertical angles are complementary. Complementary means to add to 90. Just because angles are opposite each other, this is what vertical angles look like here and here. And we've got this one and this one. Okay? So they're not always going to add to 90. You could have 30 and 30. Those don't add to 90, so that one's not it. Okay? They are adjacent. Vertical angles are never adjacent to each other. Vertical means to be across from. Adjacent means to be next to. So vertical angles and adjacent angles are actually opposites of each other. They are congruent. Vertical angles are always congruent to one another, and they are always opposite from one another. Okay. Number 6. What is the contrapositive of the following statement? If two angles have the same measure, then the angles are congruent. And then it also wants us to determine if that's true or false. So if angles have the same measure, they're congruent. That's true. Okay, so a contrapositive is when you do both the converse and the inverse. So we're going to flip these and make it say the opposite. So it would say if two angles are not congruent, then they do not have the same measure. Okay, now let's evaluate true or false. So if two angles are not congruent, then they do not have the same measure. Also true. Okay. What two things are always true about linear pairs? So linear pairs are angles that are adjacent to each other and they form a line. Okay, so they can look like this. They are complementary. No. Actually, they're the opposite of that. Adjacent angles are always supplementary, not complementary. They are congruent. Not always. They can be, but they're not always going to be. But they are always adjacent to each other. They're always going to be right next to each other and form a line. Okay, so this is the front side of the video, or the front side of the paper. For the back side of the review, I want you to go to the next video.